Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to our closing plenary for NLIHC's forum. Good afternoon. It's hard to believe that we've reached the closing plenary of the forum already, isn't it? I can't believe it. How are you all enjoying the conference? That's great. I love to hear it. It's been such a wonderful day and a half to spend together, so energizing and inspirational. I feel like you can just walk the halls and feel the community, the dedication, the power that we're building together. How many of you over the last day and a half have learned a new idea that you'll implement back in your communities? Great. How many of you have made a new partner or a new friend that you'll continue to work with? I love it. And how many of you are feeling more inspired, ready to act, ready to urge Congress to do more to achieve housing justice? Yes. Me too. Because above all, we're building this movement, this power to get Congress to act, right? To provide the large-scale investments, the tenant protections, the policy improvements that we need to achieve housing justice. You all are doing incredible work in your communities. We heard about it over the last day and a half, fighting for and winning more tenant protections, more resources for affordable, accessible homes, and always keeping a focus on the housing needs of people with the lowest incomes. And that's so critically important. And yet we also know that we need more. We need more beyond continuing improvements and momentum in states and cities, and well beyond the little affordable housing dollars that Congress provides through appropriations. We need more than ever to achieve major investments for proven solutions so that everyone has a decent, accessible, affordable future. And so we have our set of policy priorities that our Housed campaign and our OSA campaign continue to move forward. And those priorities, we have a slide for those. Those priorities are to make rental assistance universally available to all eligible households in need, as President Biden has already committed to do. We need to preserve and expand the supply of homes affordable to the lowest income renters by protecting and building new public housing and by increasing funding for the National Housing Trust Fund. And we need to make emergency rental assistance permanent to ensure that renters can absorb financial shocks that would otherwise lead to eviction. And of course, we need to continue advancing robust and enforced tenant protections. And so there are a number of priority bills, many of them bipartisan actually, that have been introduced in Congress that are actively being considered in Congress today that would advance these goals and have a measurable impact on the housing crisis. And tomorrow, when we go to Congress for Capitol Hill Day, we need to urge them to advance those bills, advance these priorities now. So this may be the last plenary, yes, and it will be fantastic, but there's still more for us to do while we're together in DC, and not just visiting the cherry blossoms, although you should if you get a chance. But tomorrow, over 400 of you will be going to Capitol Hill Day, in person or virtually, to urge Congress to protect and expand essential housing programs. This will be our largest Hill Day ever by far. 400 people with nearly 200 meetings with representatives, senators, and their staff. What an impact we can have together. And you'll be meeting with your members of Congress at a critical time. With the housing crisis worsening and homelessness increasing, Congress must act with the same urgency, bipartisanship, and decisiveness that it did during the pandemic. And we need you to urge them to take action now. So in a moment, we'll hear from one member of Congress that co-founded the Congressional Renters Caucus to build power for solutions within Congress as we're building power without. And yesterday we heard from the other co-founder, of course, Representative Maxwell Frost, and how great was he? I mean, he is fantastic. But before I introduce our next speaker, I want to give some thanks. I want to thank the wonderful hotel staff that took such great care of us all this time that we've been here, and as they have been doing for many, many years. I want to again thank all of you for joining us at this policy forum and helping us kick off our celebrations for our 50th anniversary year. I want to again thank NLIHC's Board of Directors and the Leadership Council who are here with us today for being the shoulders we stand on. And we have more here throughout the forum. If you see them, stop them, talk with them. They are NLIHC's living, breathing history. And I want to thank, and I want to ask all of you to join me in thanking the incredible team at NLIHC that's pictured here. This is such a fantastic, fantastic group of people, some of the most skilled, dedicated, impactful people I know. And I want to embarrass them all for a moment and ask them all to stand up as they're able, or raise their hands. Yeah, stand up. Stand up. Yes. Thank you all. This NLIHC team works incredibly hard throughout the year and never more in the weeks leading up to and through this conference. And I want to give special thanks to Adele Chenier, our events director. Where's Adele? Adele's doing events things, but we thank her. And to Jen Butler, our VP for External Affairs. They are together our events planning team and so much more, and they have just done outstanding work in pulling together this whole event, and those still to come this week. So many thanks to the team, and thank you for joining me in thanking them. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Representative Jimmy Gomez. Congressman Gomez represents the 34th District of California, and he has made a name for himself in Congress, advocating for bold solutions to the housing crisis. Prior to his election in Congress in 2017, Congressman Gomez served in the California State Assembly. There, he championed issues to improve the lives of low-income people in his state. He authored landmark legislation addressing public health, environmental justice, access to education, LGBTQ+ rights, and affordable housing. And today he serves on the powerful Ways and Means Committee. He is a member of House Democratic Leadership, and he's a member of the Congressional Progressive and Hispanic Caucuses. He is also the founder and leader of the Congressional Renters Caucus, which serves as a launching pad for legislative efforts and advocacy to finally give renters a voice in Washington. So please help me welcome Congressman Jimmy Gomez.
Wow, that is some great energy, which I really appreciate. Since my son Hodge is in town, he's 19 months, and he goes to bed at 8, but he woke up at 12 midnight and didn't go back to sleep until 4 in the morning, which means I woke up at 12 midnight and didn't go to sleep back till 4 in the morning. But it's been amazing having him here. So I want to just thank all of you for being here to address this important issue, and that you've been fighting this fight for years, if not decades, to address the housing crisis. But for me, this is a personal issue. When I was because I'm the youngest of 6 of immigrant parents, and when you count my parents, there's 8 of us, and we lived in a 3-room house with 1 bathroom. God bless my mom and dad. But they worked really hard to make sure that they put a roof over our head and food on the table. But before we moved into that house, we were renting in Brea, California, and my aunt called it the House of Cobwebs because it was such a poor condition that that we had to kind of clean out all the cobwebs, all the dirt, and we made it a home. But of course, the developer came up, bought up all the homes on that stretch of land, and ended up building a strip mall. So that's how we ended up moving from Orange County to Riverside. And but somebody told my parents, hey, you might be able to afford to buy a house through a special program. And because we moved inland, it was a lot cheaper. And they were able to afford a home, but with a lot of sacrifice. That dream of home ownership has just been, it's further and further out of reach for too many people, right? We always believe that you want to be a renter, but you're a renter either by choice or the fact that you are getting prepared to buy a home. Well, that idea is broken down brick by brick, right? Where people do not feel that is even an option anymore. And as I started studying the issue of housing and overcrowding and the sacrifices that people made, it was something that I began to realize it is a very hard issue because it is a very market-driven system that is about squeezing out every single dollar out of every single unit, every single month, every single year, and it doesn't matter who's living in those housing units. Right? And because of that, we have a system that has created a situation where rent is always going to outpace wages in this country. You know, every time we introduce a piece of legislation in California, which I helped raise the minimum wage, we knew that it would be that minimum wage increase would be outstripped by the cost of housing. It was something that I had a conversation with a labor leader, LaFonza Butler, who's now a California state senator. I said, housing must be on the agenda for labor. Because no matter how good you do of getting a great contract, great benefits, increase in minimum wage, I guarantee you the cost of housing and the market will outstrip anything you do. And that's why we're in the situation we're facing today, where the average renter now is considered rent burden. You know, across the country, paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. In LA, it's about 50% of their income towards rent. And that means that those individuals have less money for the basic necessities, for food, for health insurance, for saving, starting a business, paying down student loan debt. It becomes a crushing burden that they can never get out of. And this is not just a California issue or a New York issue. This thing is spreading across the country. I was on a trip with a few members. One happened to be a Republican from Omaha, Nebraska. I said, what's the #1 issue facing your district? And he says, affordable housing. In Omaha, Nebraska, affordable housing? Right? But it is true. It is an issue that touches now almost every part of our country. So we got to take it as a national emergency. My district, you know, it has the highest concentration of renters in California and the 3rd highest in the nation. And unless we do something, this is just going to get worse and worse and worse. There is a shortage of affordable housing, but also housing that's affordable. Inadequate federal rental assistance and insufficient federal housing protections. Many Americans are forced to spend more just to have the same place they had a month ago. That is not right. And we got to do more to remedy that situation. And this is the thing. A lot of the things that we're doing in Congress across the country, I say it's too small, too slow, and too inefficient. We gotta tackle this problem with the urgency of now. Right? We gotta. Because this is about our families, our children. It is about, but it's also about our economic competitiveness as a country. Most people don't talk about that. I was being on Ways and Means is a powerful committee. It's the one committee has jurisdiction over our tax structure. And tax is a powerful thing that most people don't pay enough attention to. And I attended a policy retreat. I got kicked off because we lost the majority, but I still got to go to a policy retreat in New York, and we had some of our nation's top economists. Jack Lew, who was a former Secretary of the Treasury, and Steve Ratner, and another economist, I forget his name, made a point that the two greatest factors weighing down our national GDP are childcare and rent. Yes. All right, childcare and rent. Because if you're paying more than 30% of your income towards rent, 26% to 35% of your income towards childcare, you're paying for two things. 60% of your pre-tax income go to two items. That doesn't leave you much for anything. So we're literally undermining our own economic competitiveness because we haven't dealt with these issues. So that's why I started the Dad's Caucus to address the child care crisis in this country, to make sure that if you need child care, you have a place to take your child that is safe, that is affordable, and at the same time that the people that are doing the work get paid a living wage that they can raise their own families on. And of course, I started the first ever Renters Caucus to tackle the affordability crisis in this country. And this is to create an issue where the issues of renters, building more affordable housing, Section 8 vouchers, making sure that people live in clean places, that they actually get the support they need, is at the top of a democratic agenda, not at the bottom, right? Because what happens is when you get in these rooms and there's these fights over all the different priorities like we did in Build Back Better. And we did some great things in Build Back Better and in the Inflation Reduction Act. But when it is not at the top of the agenda, it's the first thing that makes the cutting room floor. And our goal as the Renters Caucus is to start coordinating our efforts. When I got to Congress, I wanted to work on housing, and I wanted to work on some issues dealing with Section 8, because that's a big issue in Los Angeles and probably across the country. Well, I was told, hey, it goes through financial services. Well, great, I wanted to introduce a bill. Maxine was she was great. She said, yeah, introduce it. And then she didn't tell me the secret, which is like, if you're not on the committee, you're not likely to get that bill heard, which is fine. So I decided, you know what? Instead of I'm going to be the one carrying the bill that does Section 8 housing. We're going to create a coalition of members that creates a renters agenda that is through every single committee. Ways and Means, the low-income housing tax credit, financial services, Section 8. When it comes to all these ideas, appropriations to actually build more housing. So it's thinking differently. It's thinking like an organizer. It's making sure that the people that have concerns, we all work together and speak with one voice. And this is not a wish list. I'm excited that tomorrow we are unveiling the first ever comprehensive federal policy agenda focused on renters. The Renters Agenda is a sweeping set of bills to protect and uplift renters, focused on three pillars: lowering costs, increasing supply, and removing barriers. The agenda represents a landmark moment in our fight for housing justice. And like I said, it's not a wish list. This is a blueprint for a more just and equitable society. And you are all welcome to join us. We're going to be out on the Capitol steps tomorrow, 10 a.m., for the launch of this historic agenda. And we have bills that are authored by everyone from Ayanna Pressley to Becca Ballin to different members to Maxwell Frost, because this is not just a LA issue. This is an American issue, and it requires a collaborative approach. And I've introduced a sweeping set of bills. One is the Revitalizing Downtowns Act, which would help convert underutilized office space and commercial space to affordable housing. That is something that we got to do. Like empty office buildings, hotels, and malls. We've seen it. We've done it. There's organizations in this room that are doing it today. It's cheaper, faster, and you can get more people in quicker. So, and at the same time, what we want to do is introduce a bill. And I've introduced this first with Kamala Harris, and now I'm introducing it once again, which is the Rent Relief Act, which gives a tax credit, which fully refundable tax credit that puts dollars in the pockets on a monthly basis to renters who are paying more than 30% of their income towards rent. This is similar to the child tax credit, the child tax credit that lifted 40 to 60% of our children out of poverty when it was implemented. So think about that. So we have the tools in the toolbox to really change the way people live and thrive in this country. But we have to make it not as part of the agenda, the number one part of our agenda. With that, I will yield back. And I heard you have a great speaker in Maxine Waters later. She has an advantage. She's going to have an open bar with you listening. But with that, we're all in this together. And I look forward to working with every single one with you. With that, have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Representative Congressperson Gomez. I take this very brief point of privilege here to inform you, if you are not a member of the National Income Housing Coalition, please join. If you need to renew, please renew. So we always want to really encourage our membership. We have various membership levels for organizations and individuals. I represent an organization and an individual, and my 10-year-old also has a membership in the National Income Housing Coalition. So make sure you join or renew today. I have the honor and pleasure to introduce our closing plenary keynote speaker, Dr. Jelani Cobb. Dr. Cobb is a renowned author and journalist and one of the clearest voices in current conversations about race. A staff writer for The New Yorker, he's an expert on how race, politics, and history and popular culture intersect in America, and is known for sharing his brilliant opinions on current events in real time. He is featured in the hit Netflix documentary 13th, which explores the origins of mass incarceration in America. Author of highly acclaimed books, The Substance of Hope, Barack Obama and the Paradox of Progress, and To the Break of Dawn, a freestyle of the hip-hop and aesthetic. He also writes on more pressing and somber issues, like police brutality, voter access, racial discord, and the partisan polarization. As the preeminent voice on these matters, Dr. Cobb eloquently explores how the past looms in our contemporary societal landscape and how we can collectively push towards a more equitable America. As a longtime staff writer at The New Yorker, Dr. Cobb wrote a remarkable series of articles about race and justice and the police, for which he received the Sidney Hillman Prize for Opinion and Analyst Journalism. Dr. Cobb is also the Dean of Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. There, he recently accepted a DuPont Columbia Award on behalf of the filmmaker Ava DuVernay's Oscar-nominated documentary 13th, where he was prominently featured as an expert in the mythology of Black criminology. Formerly the director of the Africana Studies Institute at the University of Connecticut, Dr. Cobb is also the recipient of the Walter Bernstein Award from the Writers Guild of America for his investigative series, Policing the Police, featured in PBS Frontline. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jelani Cobb.
So I want to say thank you. Can you all hear me? All right, good. I want to say thank you to Bambi for that introduction. Also, I got to meet Ms. Mayo and Ms. Hill before I came out, and so over here in the front row. And they said they were honored to meet me, and I was surprised by that because, I'm an observer and I'm an analyst, and I'm a person who works in the arenas of history and journalism. But without people doing the work that you've been doing, for the time that you've been doing it, I have nothing to observe and I have nothing to analyze. So the honor is all mine in meeting you, and I will extend that to everyone here for doing the work that allows us to incrementally, as it may be, move forward in this society toward a more equitable landscape. So I want to talk about a few things, and then we'll get into, we'll have some time for Q&A. And one of the things I think is crucial, and one of the reasons I'm happy to be able to talk to you all today, is the fact that over the course of the years that I have done this work, I have had serial recognition or realizations of the interconnected nature of the struggles that appear to be disparate, appear to be separate, distinct things. And the further you go down the road, the more you begin to see the connections between them. And I understand that my good friend Sherilyn Eiffel spoke to you all. You notice I'm not speaking when she's around. I know better. But I want to talk to you a little bit about that, and then we'll get into some of the current landscape, and then as you all are heading out the door, we'll close by talking about the importance of doing work, even when it seems you're doing this work against long odds, or when it seems that change is not coming as quickly as it ought to. So a few years ago, we started a project. I'm the dean of the Columbia Journalism School, and we started a project which was a wedding of social science and journalism. We called it the Inequality Project. The project was a direct outgrowth of the spring of 2020, where we saw the death of George Floyd that occurred in the midst of a pandemic and in the midst of the pandemic recession. And we were having conversations about the pandemic, we were having conversations about the pandemic recession, we were having conversations about the death of George Floyd, as if those were three separate conversations. And I said, really, we're having one conversation, and that conversation is about inequality. And so thinking about this from the lens of a journalist, I said we need to survey the landscape of inequality and how it operates right now in this society. Thinking from the lens of a historian, I said inequality is not a new problem. That inequality is dynamic. It doesn't simply exist. It's like an operating system that receives periodic updates. We're not dealing with the same sort of inequality that we dealt with a century ago. And so we thought about 5 areas in which we would look at this inequality. Inequality in the criminal justice system, economic inequality, educational inequality, health inequality, and housing inequality. And of course, we knew that there would be kind of connections and ties and various things. But what shocked us is that we reached out to 5 groups of scholars, people who each studied in this one particular area, and said that we wanted to get a sense of not only how inequality operates in the society currently, but how it has been created and recreated over time. What we gradually recognized, even though these are people who have done their work distinctly for all of their careers, was that we could not have this conversation in isolation. In fact, we had to start bringing people together for these group sessions to discuss the way that inequality operated. And a young, brilliant scholar by the name of Daniel Cummings, who is working out of Johns Hopkins, who was a PhD student at the time. He just finished his doctorate and was working with Nathan Connolly. He's a great housing scholar. You all know Nathan and his incredible work. If I can take a quick detour for a second, if you don't know Nathan by name, you likely saw the story in which the Johns Hopkins professor and his wife had their home appraised. That was Nathan. And so they had their home appraised, and they received one value when they thought it was a black homeowner, and a wildly higher value when they thought that it was a white homeowner. And that happened while Nathan was operating as a advisor for the Inequality Project. And so it was like the inequality, it was like, they're on to us. But it's like pointing out, the things that, the very thing that we were studying in the midst of it. And so when Daniel Cummings produces this report, sends us about a 75-page report on the way that housing inequality has operated and has been created and recreated. He talks about it saying that there has never been a point at which there wasn't housing inequality. That housing inequality began at the system at which, the moment at which the United States created a housing system. That it was baked into it. But the various ways in which this mechanism operated differed over time. And so one of the early mechanisms is, as you all know, the restrictive covenant. People have legal documents that would prohibit who can purchase a home, or if you purchase a home, who you can, in fact, sell that home to after that. And so this is obviously at the beginning of the creation of the housing market, in the beginning of the 20th century in the United States. This is a kind of abstract concern. This is not like home buying is now or home ownership is now. But still, it was apparent enough that this would have downstream implications because the NAACP, which was established in 1909, in response to lynching, NAACP comes into existence for the purpose of responding to the surge of lynchings that are happening as Black people begin migrating out of the South. That is the impetus for its creation. One of its first legislative, or rather, excuse me, one of its first litigation victories, however, is the Buchanan v. Worley case in 1917, which is a lawsuit about restrictive covenants. And they win that suit. It's ultimately overturned 5 years later, which allows restrictive covenants to accelerate throughout the country. This creates the infrastructure, starts in a couple of places where almost it's like a piloting of a new program. Baltimore is one of the places that first began to adopt restrictive covenants. Minneapolis was another of the places that first began to adopt restrictive covenants. St. Louis was another pioneer in the landscape of restrictive covenants. And so we move into the middle third of the 20th century. We see the rise of redlining. Everyone here knows about the disastrous implications of redlining, what it does, how it begins to accelerate the disparities and inequalities that are already apparent in the housing system, about how the FHA, in turn, in between, I think it's 1935 and 1970, 98% of the home loans that it underwrites are for white people. And this is a dynamic that we see. And you all have read Richard Rothstein. You know about the federal government's role in implication, and Keeanga, Yamada Taylor, all the people who have laid this out for us. And we see the way that this inequality, in turn, connects to the caliber and quality of education people have access to dire matters of healthcare that are directly connected to where you live. As a matter of fact, by the beginning of the 20th century, people are now reverse engineering this and saying that we can look at your zip code and then determine your longevity, your life expectancy, your educational level, your lifetime earnings, all these things. And it's because the system has now, housing has now become a metaphor for all these other dynamics in your life. And so we see these things, how they accelerate over time. And then I start to think, I've spent the past 12 years now at The New Yorker as my primary journalistic outlet. And when I first came to The New Yorker, I covered a series of cases, high-profile cases, that involved policing and unjust use of force. And so in 2014, I was sent to Ferguson, Missouri. This was in the immediate aftermath of Michael Brown's death. So I arrived, literally when I arrived, there were still things on fire. This is in the immediate kind of beginning of the conflicts that arose there. As people know, 18-year-old Michael Brown shot by a Ferguson police officer. His body remains on the street for 3.5 hours on August 9th in 90-plus degree heat, traumatizing this community. And it sparks the beginning of what people come to know as the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I'm there. I'm talking to people. I'm going around. And one of the things that was strange to me in the moment, but something that I found to be repeated time and time again in other circumstances, was that I would start out talking about Michael Brown, and then people would start talking about other dynamics. And we have in this society, you know, we tend to be an ahistorical society. We have historical amnesia. We don't like to talk about what happened more than 2 weeks ago, much less what happened 10 years, 50 years, 100 years ago. But what I found is that there is a kind of internal, organic history, that people understand the history that pertains to their current life. And the reason I say that is that when I was in Ferguson, more than one person pointed out to me that Dred Scott was buried not far from where we were. And so as we remember that 1857 Dred Scott decision that held that a black person was not capable of citizenship. And so when we went a little bit further, we talk about Ferguson as a sundown town. And so, and I grew up in Queens, New York, but I was raised by a father from Georgia and a mother from Alabama. My mother's from Bessemer, Alabama. Anybody from Bessemer or Birmingham? Okay, that's always, yeah. And my father is from Hazelhurst, Georgia. If anybody raises their hands, that means they're my cousin. Wait, hold up. There it is. Cousin, I will see you at the reunion. And so I know, they both told me what a sundown town was as I was growing up, all right? And so we understand that Ferguson was a sundown town. And we get a little bit further into this conversation and we start talking about the fact that the beginning of suburbanization and the discriminatory policies that went along with it, St. Louis was one of the first American cities to begin building suburbs. And so we're right here in the pilot program. And then you start looking around at Ferguson. When I left Ferguson, I was driving and I drove into a nearby community And this conversation grew to be about the suburbanization of poverty. And that was what we were dealing with. This is what we were talking about here. And when I left Ferguson, I went directly into a nearby community called Country Club. And I know all the Missouri people know what I'm talking about. I went to Country Club, and I started, just out of curiosity, I looked up Country Club's demographics. And I saw that this community was 80-something% African American. And I said, well, nobody names a place Country Club intending for it to be 80% African American. And so what we were talking about were the dynamics of white flight and now the resulting suburbanization of poverty, the absence of services, the result coming to be policing that was extractive and being used as a force to raise revenue for this community, and this all coming back to housing. That's what people wanted to talk about. What happened to Michael Brown was horrific. They wanted to talk about how we got to the point where something like Michael Brown could happen. So the following year, police in Baltimore driving, and they see a young man by the name of Freddie Gray, learning impaired young man. He runs when they see him. They grab him, place him in the back of a vehicle, and drive around without securing him. He winds up suffering terrible injuries and breaking his neck, dying. I'm sent to Baltimore. And I'm in Baltimore, and I'm reporting on this. And we go back to the restrictive covenants that were being piloted in Baltimore. And this time I go back and say, just as part of my research, I'm going to read the reports that came about in the aftermath of the rebellions, the uprisings that happened after Dr. King died, which Baltimore was one of the largest. All of these cities produced reports. And I go to the library, I pull this report, I read it, and they start talking about how the decline in Baltimore's population doesn't begin after 1968. Doesn't begin after downtown was ablaze. It begins in the 1940s, after World War II. And it accelerates in the 1950s. And one of the dynamics that you see is that the jobs that were in Baltimore proper begin moving to Baltimore County and other places in Baltimore and Maryland. And the jobs follow the white flight. And so we see a population that is increasingly trapped in dire housing circumstances. I write this story. Lots of other things happened in the interim. And then in 2020, we saw that horrific snuff film, nearly 9 minutes long, in which George Floyd's life was extinguished. We see national outrage around this, international. Largest scale protests that we have ever seen in the history of this country. Once again, I am dispatched. I head to Minneapolis. And this time, I'm not going in cold. I mean, I know people there, I know scholars there, I know housing people, I know public policy people, and I also have a colleague who is writing a biography of Hubert Humphrey. And he starts talking about all of the underlying mechanisms and dynamics of housing segregation and inequality that begin in Minneapolis. There's another interesting eyewitness to this, which is the photographer, really filmmaker,